for continuing to join us this afternoon. I am Seth Hayden, NCDA's President-elect. It is my privilege to introduce the final Presidential Choice Live event presented by Jackie Peila-Shuster and Kristen Tandy. Jackie is an Associate Professor of Counseling and Career Development Graduate Program at Colorado State University. Kristen is the Career and Professional Development Advisor at the Colorado School of the Mines. They will be presenting on supporting unemployed mid to late career adults through the lens of the Schlossberg's 4-6 transition model. They will be presenting a case study which you can download from the conference app to follow along. Welcome, Jackie and Kristen, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much, Seth. Real quick, I want to thank Dr. Kathy Evans, the entire NCDA board and NCDA headquarters for their amazing ability to quickly pivot and pull together what I think has just been a really successful first ever NCDA virtual global conference. And as much as I've enjoyed this conference, I really look forward to seeing people in 3-dimension in Atlanta next year. I also want to thank everyone that is tuned in for your flexibility and your commitment to career development and the people that we serve. I also want to let you know that Kristen Tandy is unable to join us today due to a family emergency, and so NCDA has always been my career family and is newly her career family. She just recently graduated from our program. So I'm asking my family to send any kind of positive energy and light that you can towards her at this time. And then Seth already mentioned that the case study is on the conference app if you want to be able to read along as we go along. I'll have major points on the PowerPoint presentation, but if you like to get the gestalt of it, you might want to download that and have it to follow along. So we're going to go ahead and get started talking about Schlossberg's 4S model and supporting. I'll be honest with you, it was originally unemployed mid to late career adults, but as we know now, it's going to be pretty much anyone at this time. So we're going to be talking about various issues that do tend to affect mid to late career adults who are unemployed. We're also going to be looking at Schlossberg's 4S model to really start wrapping our heads around the complexities that can go into individuals' transitions. We're going to be looking at people's assets, the complications, the barriers, the supports, options that are open to some but not to others. And with that, we have to be very, very attuned to listening to multicultural considerations as we use this model. Just like Dr. Davis was talking about, we need new models, we need changed models, and the models that we do use, we need to filter them through and have at the very center multicultural counseling competence. So let's talk a little bit about those who are unemployed and what they are more likely to be encountering. We know that depression, anxiety, physical health issues, lowered self-esteem, loss of identity, perceived lower social support, poor coping mechanisms, all of these are affecting folks, all folks, not just mid to late career, who are unemployed. We know that those who are unemployed for longer periods have even more harmful effects. And that one of these effects is that for those that have been unemployed for more than 6 months, those positive, I can get the job, I can get through this, that decreases. That positivity starts to decrease. There's not a lot of literature on mid to late career unemployed. And so we were searching through this because we recently wrote an article in a group counseling, the Journal for Specialists in Group Work. Yes, that's it. And we were looking about information for mid to late career unemployed. So that right there needs to be researched more if anybody wants to be taking that on. But in addition to all these other issues that they have, we know that those who are 55 and older, they're encountering greater difficulty in getting callbacks. In finding another job. And part of that is they're getting fewer callbacks, especially for lower skilled positions. And mid-career workers are less likely to change their careers. They're going to avoid that because they perceive themselves especially if they perceive themselves to be older than those who are working in that field. So we got a lot of self-dialogue that's going on there as well. So why do we bring all this up? Well, because what we think is, well, let's help them get a job, right? That's what we want to do. We want to help people be able to live their careers, live their lives, get those jobs. But sometimes we're so quick to jump to that we forget to take a pause. And so when I talk about this slide, it's about taking that pause. It's about looking, are we buffering? I noticed in the initial presentation that we had, somebody had mentioned in the chat with the buffering signal that's going around and around and around, somebody had said, wow, there's power in the pause. So I'm asking us to remember to take a breath and take a pause. And if we need some support in doing this, we can look to some of the literature that is out there in terms of a meta-analysis that was done on the psychological and physical well-being of folks during unemployment. And actively engaging in job search activities was actually found to be related to lower mental health, right? So jumping right into the next thing without taking the pause, we could actually be doing harm. We also know that those negative feelings, those negative experiences that are going on for folks, it's going to make it a lot more difficult to even focus on the job search. Think about what the job search entails. I mean, that's a 24-hour, that's a full-time job, trying to find a job. And then you add on everything else, and then let's add on more to that. Now we're worried about health and well-being and safety. It's time to take a pause and listen deeply to people and meet them where they're at. And we think that Schlossberg's 4S model can do that. It can help us understand transitions from this person's perspective, not ours. It can help us reach into their culture, their context, their values, and understand what's going on for them. It can help us figure out what are the assets and liabilities and supports that are available or that are hindering any sort of forward movement. And then we can collaborate in strategies to help folks successfully move through those transitions. And for me, collaboration and partnership is key to this because it's not about me telling someone my answers. It's about me working with someone so they find their answers. So let's talk a little bit about transitions. And we need it, I think this helps. I think Brian Hutchison brought up a great thing the other day when he talked about we need to situate our work in the broader context of life. And this model is one way that has helped Kristen and I be able to do this. So when we look at transitions and look at how do we even begin to approach this and wrap our head around it, we first need to think about, well, what is a transition? And this is Schlossberg's model, and Schlossberg, Waters, and Goodman have excellent writings around it. And then Anderson, Goodman, and Schlossberg also have a wonderful book that is part of the bibliography that you can download on the conference app for this presentation. And I really highly encourage you to take a look at those writings as well. But a transition, in essence, is any event or non-event that results in changed relationships, routines, assumptions, and roles. So in other words, something's going on, something's different. So when we think about that transition, let's identify the transition, and then let's think about the process and where they're at in that process. So when we're identifying the transition, this model breaks it down into three types. One is it an anticipated transition? Was I expecting this to happen? So somebody who's in school is probably expecting to graduate and then expecting to get a job. An unanticipated event, we don't have any idea what that might be right now, right? Does anybody have any guesses? Unanticipated events? Feel free to put any in the chat. We know right now we all have had a huge unanticipated event with COVID-19. With that unanticipated event has been other unanticipated events, being laid off, having to work from home, having to get information set up in ways and put out there in ways that we've never thought about before. So a lot of unanticipated transitions going on right now. A lot of non-events have happened. How many of you know someone, whatever age they are, high school, college, that didn't get to have their graduation? That ritual, that ceremony, that's such a big marker for a lot of folks. How many have not got to have birthday parties? How many have lost someone in their lives but not got to grieve with other people? Those are all non-events. Another non-event that's happening for a lot of people is a job that they had secured, but then due to the downturn in the economy, it's gone now. And so they're not starting that job. Or if they do have a job and they have started it, they're not getting to go through the excitement of being onboarded the way they thought they were going to. I can't tell you how many graduates have talked with me right now who are saying, yeah, so I started my job, but I still have never seen my office, and I still haven't actually been around my coworkers except for on the screen. And there's some grief and loss going on with those non-events. So then how do people react to transitions? I always like to think about perspective in terms of a couple little kids playing in the ocean. You can visualize them. They're out there playing in the ocean. This is before having social distance, so they're close together, playing, laughing, having a good job, and then a wave comes and just knocks them right over. One stands up, laughing, ready to go for it again, hoping another wave comes along to knock them over again because that was just fun. The other one gets up and is crying and scared and fearful, right? Same event, very different reactions. And a lot of that is based on their perspective of the event, which of course is steeped into some biology, but the context, the culture, how they grew up, a whole bunch of other things. So we've got nature and nurture going on, feeding into each other. So how does the person that's sitting across from us, going through a big transition or transitions, how do they regard the transition? What is their perspective on it? Do they see it as anticipated, unanticipated? Do they see it as a non-event? Do they see it as positive, negative, neutral, all of the above? I think that right now we've seen that emotions can be all over the place, all at the very same time. And how do we help normalize some of that? When we look at reactions to transitions, we also need to think about context, because contextual and cultural factors are going to have both direct and indirect influences on the transition. And it's going to have a lot of effect on the choices and resources available to some, and as we saw from Dr. Davis, not to others. We also need to think about the chronosystem, right? The historical influences that are going on, the time-related events, the history that people are living through. How is this chronosystem right now, the coronavirus chronosystem, going to affect people later? How did 9/11 affect folks? How have events throughout the world affected folks differently in different ways? If we look at mid to late career workers right now, a lot of those folks were growing up in the 80s, the mid-career folks. And in the 80s is when we saw that real drift of moving away from the organization's going to take care of you, you've got a job here for life, pensions, that kind of stuff, to a lot of layoffs. And so kids who grew up through that have a very different perspective of work. And then the impact of the transition. What is the impact? To what extent is this really changing and altering one's daily life? I think about a couple of friends of my husband and I. They were in Italy when things were awful in Italy. They didn't know it. They were honeymooning, so, you know. But it's funny because when they got to the airport to come home, that's when they really started learning about a lot of it. And they got home, and their lives didn't change very much because they had always been working from home. And they had always been doing takeout, and they had been doing a lot of those things. But what about the worker that their job's just gone now? And for us to be thinking in the future, what about the worker who thought their job might come back, but is now going to be automated? Because perhaps it's safer, perhaps it's a way that the company that they work for can keep fewer people in the building. And maybe these are going to be, I worry about this because I think it can be an opening for even more automation to take over folks' jobs. And we have to advocate that different organizations are going to really try to retool and reskill and retrain folks for that automation. So perspective, context, and impact. Then we need to think about the process, the transition process. We often think of people of moving in as being the starting point, but William Bridges and so many others really say, well, actually moving out is probably the starting process because beginnings start because there's an ending. So where are they at in this process? Have they had space to grieve the ending? Have they even been told they can grieve that ending? How are they moving in? Are they moving through? That moving through area is just really hard for folks. And oftentimes we see folks in this position where they're moving through because they have 1 foot here, they have 1 foot here, and they're straddling this. And with that comes a lot of ambivalence and ambiguity and anxiety and a whole lot of emotions that have to be considered and have to be thought about, which is why just trying to move straight into searching for the job may need to happen, right? Because people need to be able to eat. People need to be able to have a roof over their heads. And how are we also making space for those emotions so that folks can engage with the job search, so folks can be ready for that and be successful with it? And here we come to the whole theme of this amazing conference, and it's just been very filling and very thought-provoking. And I always love that because on my walk with my privilege, I know that the more I learn, the more I realize, well, I don't know anything. The more I learn, the more I realize I have to unlearn. And so we have to be willing to understand that we cannot see the back of our head. And so what is it that's back there that we can't see? And how can we start trying to open that up a little bit, maybe taking a mirror so that we can start seeing that a little bit better? So we have to understand things like opportunity structure, power, privilege, systemic racism, discrimination, oppression. Those are all real. And they're going to affect every part of this person's transition. It's going to affect everything we just talked about, the reactions to transitions, how they're regarding the transition, where they're at in the process in the transition. And it's going to affect the choices, the options, the assets, and the resources that are available to some and not to others. We have to work within this person's worldview, their values, not ours. No, I'm not saying we can be value-free. I've heard people talk about, no, we have to leave our values at the door, value-free when we can't be. Values are our very core. They're the essence of our being oftentimes. But by realizing that, then we can realize that this person across from us, it is their essence, it is their very being. And we have to understand that the socio-political, historical, and cultural context, those are the lenses through which we understand our values. So how can we become better aware of environments and systems that are reinforcing stereotypes, that are perpetuating oppression, and they're shaping interactions? And if we just go blindly forward, advising and telling people how to do something without actually sitting, listening, learning, and engaging this person and finding their power, then we're missing the boat. We also have to understand that differences have historically been equated with inferiority, and they've been pathologized through scientific racism and white supremacy. And there are hundreds and hundreds and probably thousands of examples of this. There is a recent article in the American Counseling Association about scientific racism in the counseling field and in the psychology field. And I encourage you to find these resources, learn new things, start understanding other perspectives if you aren't already, so that you can challenge yourself to break out of stereotypes, to start acknowledging your implicit bias and working on it, so that we can be inclusive of what optimal functioning might look like for other cultures and other identities. Because if what we're saying optimal functioning is, and if what we're saying our interventions are, is based on the normative models that are out there, then we're basing them on the Western white male majority normative models that have been a part of our history, at least in this country, for years and years and years and years, hundreds of years. Why does that have to be the normal? Time for us to take a look in that. And then intersectionality, one word. Kimberly Crenshaw coined it. I think that I got really excited with Dr. Arredondo's personality identity model. And I encourage us to take a look at that or some other ones, because it's so useful, because we can be looking at all those different circles and identities that were in there, so that we're understanding from this person's perspective what identities are salient, what might need to be explored, what's being impacted, what can be impacted, what's making an impact. How are those all coming together so that we understand more of the totality of this person and their context and what they're going through right now. All right, there. Now I got my slide going. So I want you all to meet Sarah. And this can be where you, if you want to follow along, I've got the whole thing written out for you. And we'll go to just the main points. And we're going to talk about the 4 S's that are part of the model, because all of that is a lot of stuff that I talked about in terms of what we need to be doing and what we need to be thinking about. And I don't know about you, but I'm not smart enough to keep all of that straight. So I like to have a model that helps me think and slow down. And so that's where the 4S model can come in very handily. So first, let's meet Sarah. Sarah's 56, a Latina cisgender female, wife, mother, heterosexual, Christian, middle class, has worked for 20 years as a bookkeeper to help make ends meet on and off. Was laid off about a month ago. Had a child, her last child, move out of the house. Comes to us saying she's been experiencing anxiety and depression. Adult daughter said, Mom, I think you need to go get some career counseling. So whoever worked with the daughter earlier so that this person even knew about career counseling, good work. Sarah tells us she's been thinking about advocacy work and that she's really interested in that work, and we'll learn more about her as to where some of those interests started. But she's also worried she's too old to be making changes. let alone having to do any more schooling. So visualize Sarah for a second. If you need to close your eyes for a second, see Sarah sitting in front of you. So let's take a look at the first S, Sarah's situation. What's going on? What is her situation? Things we can be thinking about is what triggered this? What set off this transition? And I forgot to mention, at this time, if you want to be putting information in the chat, this is that part where it would be a question, or not question and answer, but an interactive part. So feel free to go ahead and use the chat function to be talking about what is the trigger? What seems to have set off this transition? What is the timing of this transition? And when we look at timing, we're looking at Sarah's social clock. And she said something about that. So in her social clock, there's something going on there in terms of the timing of this transition. I'm going to sorry, I'm trying to get the chat to come up a little bit better here for me. Got it. Control. What aspects of this transition does Sarah even have any kind of control over? What aspects might she be able to influence? What's out? Yeah, last child to college is a good trigger. Being laid off is a good trigger. How long is this transition going to go on? Is this a permanent kind of a thing? Is this temporary? Has Sarah had any experience with similar transitions? That can always be a helpful kind of brief solution-focused way of saying, has there been a time you've experienced something similar? How did you work through that? Nice job with the loss of a job, empty nest, age, no control, unintended consequences. Are there concurrent stressors going on? We'll find out there's more. And how is Sarah looking at this? And even though it's not all in the case study that I've presented so far, do you see how these can also give you questions that you might be asking so that you gain better understanding? What else would you want to know about Sarah's situation, especially as you think about these last several months? Is Sarah's anxiety being impacted not only by COVID, but by the, I don't want to say current situation, because we know that Black Lives Matter and all of the things that I've been saying it's been festering for 400 or 500 years, and now it's bursting out finally. Perhaps that's the way that some change can finally start happening. But all of this has got to be part of it. And how about we just saw all the health disparities that was part of Dr. Davis's presentation. I like that. Is she considering a career change? So she wants to do this advocacy work. Is she even thinking that that's what she's wanting as a career, or is that more of a side thing? I don't know. Let's learn a little bit more about Sarah. So we find out that Sarah's husband runs his own construction business, and they've struggled financially at times, but her income from her bookkeeping job has always provided some stability. And she's able to say, you know what, we've always been able to bounce back from those tough times. What is that saying about Sarah? She says she's had a long-time interest in reading articles and books about women's and Latinx discrimination issues. For those of you that like career construction, which I am an avid fan of, then we're also going, wow, this is some manifest interest, because manifest interests are, where do we put ourselves vicariously? That tells us a lot about things that we're interested in. She started a 4-year degree in political science after high school, but left school when she got married. And she served on various PTA committees and coordinated numerous fundraising drives for her church. She found all those activities invigorating, which is cool. So then we're thinking, oh, it's the activities that are invigorating, but we need to listen deeper. Because if we listen deeper, then we hear that she says the end goal was involved helping the school and the community. So we're seeing things like perseveres and has hope for the future. There have been some unachieved goals. There's been strengths and skills that are transferable. And there's themes on this page that we're starting to see. We're starting to see more and more themes that are lining up. As we look at the presentation on career construction yesterday, right? What stories are you hearing? What themes are starting to come out? So now we get to look at the self, second S of the model. What she brings to the transition. And we all have assets and we all have liabilities, right? Considerations are going to include personal and cultural and demographic factors. And psychological resources are going to include all those things that can both help and or hinder, right? Tolerating ambiguity, wow, that's been a really hard thing for a lot of folks. That's a hard thing for all of us, I think, and especially now. And now we're talking about, for Sarah, if this is the time she's going through this, we're talking about ambiguity upon ambiguity upon ambiguity, right? Optimism, self-efficacy, resilience. So what are some of these things that she's bringing? I like how somebody said we're starting to get some glimpses of purpose. Is able to withhold judgment. As we think about these last several months, is there some other things that's coming up as you're thinking about what you've read about Sarah and the self? I'll go back a slide. We see some resilience, some optimism with this bounce back. I love that you're bringing up religion. I think oftentimes we aren't willing to go there to religion or spirituality with folks. And we have to examine where is that coming from, right? Because this can be a very important factor in a lot of our clients' lives. Great ideas that are coming out in the chat. Thank you all. So how about Sarah's circles? I say circles because I tend to go a lot by Kahn and Antonucci's social convoy model. But let's look at Sarah's circles. Right now, we knew she had a kid, right? The last one moved out. Turns out she has 2 that identify as female and 1 identifies as a male. One daughter's married, son just left for college. Her youngest daughter, of the 2 daughters, recently came out and is in a loving relationship with a woman. See what happens when we listen even further and ask good questions? Husband, though, she says, has had difficulties with the daughter coming out. Sarah, though, says, no, I support my daughter, and I found some friends at church with whom I can talk. Husband was supportive of her previous job as a bookkeeper, but questions, why do you want to go back to work now? Construction business is doing well. Isn't it time for you to relax? Sarah is looking a little deeper. I like how somebody said withholding judgment and said, you know, I wonder if my husband feels guilty that I've had to work to help support the family all these years. Extended family members, we heard this in that first slide, right, has told her that she's too old to start something new. Some other potential supports that have made her feel a little bit more optimistic have been her previous supervisor from her bookkeeping job and other PTA members. And they've all offered to serve as references. And there's a little something that comes out about self, right? People have offered to serve as references. They haven't had to be asked yet. They're just offering it up. Wonder what that says. And then church members. Church members have been supportive of our ideas around advocacy work, and they've even been helpful in connecting her to some folks, or at least offering that up. So this moves us into our third S, support. These are the supports that are available to someone during their transition. And I'm very careful to think about this thoroughly, because when we talk about supports, we often name those supportive people all the supportive people in our lives. So I want you to stop just for a minute and close your eyes if you want to. Take a deep breath, stretch a little bit if you need to. I know it's been a long day on Zoom. Think about the supportive people in your life. How are they supportive? In what ways are they supportive? Are they supportive in every situation? Or do you call on some people for some things and some people for other things? I personally have a wonderful mother. Love her so very much, and she is incredibly supportive of me. And there are certain situations in my life where my mom's not I'm going to call on for the support, because I know that her way of being supportive might not be useful in that situation for me. So we really want to dive into this, not just a cursory exam of, so who supports you, right? The other thing I want to bring up is what was talked about yesterday in terms of who is your challenge group as well. Who's your challenge network? I love the idea of that, and I'm going to be listening to Dr. Adam Grant more often, so thank you, Brian, for that one. Who are those people that you trust so much that you can go to that can help you problem solve or problem find with some of the ideas that you're having? Sorry, my colleague and I were going to be watching chat while one of us is presenting and vice versa, so every once in a while I'm taking a pause to be able to look over the chat as well. Yes, I agree. Many times clients are seeking permission to make the shift. And who is she needing that permission from, right? Sometimes a little bit from us, maybe a lot from herself, but because I need to know her values and therefore go into her context, her culture, I need to know what does she value also in terms of support and permission. Are there other options? This might be something when we get to strategies in terms of, do we need to create some other options? And one thing that Kristen and I were thinking a lot about is how accessible are those supports right now? I don't know when a lot of you went into lockdowns or stay at home, or we call it safer at home now, but for us it was mid-March. And all of a sudden, a lot of those people that I didn't realize the tiny ways that they supported me, whether it was just a conversation in the hall or a walk outside, were no longer accessible. And that's just a cursory view of it. That's a very skimmed view of it. It's a very privileged view of it, to be honest with you. How about folks that don't get to have the technology that I have to still be able to try to connect? Looking at those differences and thinking not like we think, but thinking like how our client thinks, and reflecting back to them what we're hearing, what we're seeing encouraging ways too. I'm seeing so many things that this person might not have thought about. Desire to help, a nurture, religions of support. Sounds like a great work ethic, withholds judgment, unconditional support, right? So again, these three S's help us pause, because there's power in the pause. whoever wrote that on the first day of the conference, I'm sorry I didn't write your name down. I would be giving you all sorts of credit right now because it was very beautiful and very poignant that there is power in that pause. So moving into the fourth S, and please note it's the fourth S, because those first ones help us take stock so that then we can start moving into strategies. But that means we have to slow down, see where this person is, understand the transition, the impact on them, their viewpoint of it, their perspective of it, the identities that they're carrying through that transition, and how that's affecting the transition, affecting them, and how those can be strengths so that the person can reclaim their power. Nicole Noble, thank you. Appreciate that. So when we look at strategies in this model, it's really referring to the individual style of coping, right? So we need to think about what coping strategies are they currently using? So how are you getting through this? How are you handling the emotions that are going on? What kinds of things have you been doing so far, right? And we're looking at things that modify the situation. Sometimes we need to change the meaning of the situation. Are we looking at this as a crisis or an opportunity? How are we managing the stress around this? And there's no one right way. It all depends on the situation, the person, their context, what they're bringing to the table, as well as that whole socio-political historical system and what that is putting on the person as well. Some questions that I like to ask around this is, I'm not a huge solution refocused person, but I do like this to ask these up and say, you know, if you woke up tomorrow and everything was going the way you wanted it to go, what's your day look like? What's going on? What are people saying about you? Because this gets us to not just, oh, well, I have a job and I'm happy. Okay, so what does happy look like for you? What are things that you're doing when you're happy? Because this helps us think about life design, which is situating the person's work inside of their whole life context. What else do we need to think about in terms of how strategies might need to be modified given the last several months? I'm sure a lot of you have been doing some of this work. Personal branding. Which is really getting a sense of self, right? Which might be something that we need to work on before she's even ready to do the job search. We've found that by taking in information about the transition and that the husband is encouraging her not to return to work yet, we know we've got a little hint there that, okay, it's not real urgent in terms of meeting some of those basic needs. So maybe we have a little bit more time here. Social capital and currency. Nice. Where are the strengths? Yeah, see, this is all the stuff that y'all are good at. So we have all these ideas, and we know that if we're putting them on Sarah, it could end up not going anywhere. So this is where we get to use our wonderful toolkits and our wonderful skills to help Sarah reclaim her power in this situation. And it has to be based on what Sarah thinks is good for Sarah. And that's part of that not falling into a normative sort of model, but instead really letting Sarah drive this. What is healthy and happy? What does all that look like for Sarah? What does advocacy look like for Sarah? What does support look like for Sarah? What kinds of support would she want or hasn't even thought about that maybe she would want? What's important to her? Yeah, there are so many opportunities. I'm looking at this last one. So how do we, I'm going to ask a question around that because I love that idea. And we heard at the very beginning that Sarah's like, yeah, but I'm too old for any more education. So if we tell Sarah, here's all these opportunities, hopefully she'll get excited, and she might not. So what would we do then? How do we help Sarah claim her power and decide what's best for Sarah? Well, I like that question. Brainstorm, nice. So as we take a pause to understand where our clients are in their pause, perhaps more transformative shifts can take and Sarah can be more ready. Because if Sarah was ready to take action and go, she's got references that are available for her, she's getting connected to people, but there's still something that brought her into you, right? That's traditional networking, informational interviewing. And when we look at that, we even have to look at what somebody said before, social capital. We know she's got some connections, but how confident is she? Does she feel like that's a space she's even allowed to enter? So how do we, that's where for our work, I love that Dr. Davis talked about we need to make space for voices that go unheard. We need to make space for those voices that we are not even thinking about. And so on this individual level, how are we making sure that we're creating space for Sarah's voice and we're creating space for Sarah to tell us where she feels her voice is heard and not heard? What questions, we're at the almost, I want to let you know that I didn't write all my references out on the slide, mostly because I had to get it sent in early and I forgot, so that's why there's a whole bibliography available for you on the conference app. But I'd like to know what kind of questions you all might have right now. So I'll ask you a question. If you wouldn't mind in the chat box, I'd like to know, I always ask my students, so here's the what. So what does considering this model, the next part is the so what. So what does considering this model and enveloping it or having at the very core of it multicultural considerations, so what does that mean for you? And now what are you going to do with it? So I'm asking you to think about your so what and your now what. How are you going to take this forward so that it wasn't just this time that we got to spend together in two-dimensional sorts of views, but how are you going to take it forward? How are you going to take what you learned, one piece that you learned that you're going to commit to move forward, whether from this presentation or from the whole conference? Make a commitment. Here's a question. So how do you thread the needle of showing Sarah what options might be out there while honoring her voice and desires? She might, exactly. She's not even aware of all the options. I mean, neither are we, and we're supposed to understand this career counseling, right, and career development, career education. that's one of the things I often talk about with interest assessments is how can we even know what we're interested in if we've never been exposed to it? So a lot of this is saying, is just asking for permission, saying, you know, would you be willing to take this journey with me in terms of even seeing what else is out there? You said you were going to get a political science degree. Let's start with that. What was interesting about that? Where might you want to go? Where would you have wanted to go with that? We have great questions that have come up saying if you were going to wake up tomorrow morning and you got to do the advocacy work that you've been talking about, what would that look like? What changes would you be making in the world? What problems are out there that you want to be a part of solving? And as we generate that interest and that motivation, then we can introduce and thread this needle, right? We can introduce this saying, you know, there's other information out there that we can even expand upon that should you want to look at more options. When it comes to giving a pause at the beginning, how long should we allow a pause? Figure in my program, the students know that the answer is, it depends. That's always they hate that answer. But then they start saying it all the time. This pause, what is this information? It's all going to depend on what is going on. I mean, are you in this place where you get a half an hour with somebody? Are you in a place where you're going to get multiple visits? So some of that is dictated to us and by our surroundings, right? So what needs to happen that might move the needle a little bit if it needs to be moved quickly? But I think it's a lot about going back and saying, Sarah, how can I be useful, not helpful? And thank you, Mark Savickas. How can I be useful in this transition of yours? So that you really gain an understanding and a commitment on both your parts of what is our contract in terms of what you're seeking from me and how I can be useful. And then as other things come up and we're hearing different themes and we reflect back going, wow, that's got to be confusing to have your husband be really excited or really supportive of you previously, but now it sounds like you're kind of wondering about that support. Sounds like that could be confusing for you. And then I stay silent for a little while after that to see if there's deeper moments that come out of that. Could be that Sarah comes in and is like, you know, I really think I want to do this, but I'm scared to go back to school, but you know what, I want to start looking into schools. Okay. Who's to say we can't be looking into more education or badges or certifications or things like that while still engaging in dialogue? To have those little flags that come up that say, no, but maybe this is something that might want to be explored, and then getting permission to explore those should Sarah want to. Would you like to be instead of, yeah, like that? And again, the useful versus helpful, that is definitely Dr. Mark Savickas. And it's very helpful for us too, because remember, you're there to be useful, not to be right. You're there to be useful. Yeah, pulling in conversations about the husband. Did I miss any questions? If so, please repeat it because the screen might have just disappeared in terms of what I'm able to see. I have to say the comments in the chats that I've been seeing have just been wonderful. I'd love to, maybe that's something NCDA board can be thinking about in terms of how do we have those conversations when we also still get to be back 3D and live, because there's just wonderful notes that are coming out of these and wonderful ideas that are coming just up in those moments for folks. I also, what I've been seeing, and I want to thank you all for this, is how dedicated you've been to taking in information and pulling it all together. It's inspiring. It's what I love about NCDA, and it just warms my heart, and I'm so glad that I got to be a part of this week with you all.
Thank you so much, Jackie. And on behalf of NCDA headquarters staff, thank you to all of our presenters, our board of directors, and our attendees. Thank you for sticking with us and continuing to support NCDA through these uncertain times.